His hand moved so fast the gunman never saw it coming. 1 second the barrel was pressed against a waitress's temple. The next second the gun was gone and the man holding it was face down on a diner floor gasping, wondering what in God's name just happened to him. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. And then everyone in that diner turned and looked at the same man they had ignored all night. The tired guy in the faded gray hoodie, sitting alone in a corner booth with a half-eaten plate of eggs. Just a single dad. That's what they thought. But what happens before that moment? That's the story nobody expected. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, subscribe. You won't want to miss what comes next. The night David Walker drove into Stone Creek, he had exactly $43 in his wallet, a sleeping 6-year-old in the back seat, and the quiet, practiced habit of checking every mirror every 30 seconds. Old habits. The kind that don't leave you just because you handed in your trident. Stone Creek, Pennsylvania population, 11,000 give or take, sat at the intersection of Route 9 and State Road 14. The kind of town where the gas station still had a bell that rang when you pulled over the pump, and the diner on the corner had been run by the same family since 1987. David had passed through once before years ago, on a drive that had nothing to do with peace or quiet. He hadn't thought about it since. But here he was. He pulled into the parking lot of the Crossroads Diner at 10:47 on a Tuesday night, killed the engine, and sat for a moment in the silence. In the back seat, his daughter Emma was curled against her car seat pillow, her mouth slightly open. One small hand fisted around the strap of her backpack. She was 6 years old. She had her mother's dark hair and David's stubborn jaw, and she had not made a single sound for the last 112 miles. David watched her breathe for a moment. Just breathe. "Okay," he said quietly to no one. He got out of the car, walked around to Emma's side, and gently unclipped her buckle. She stirred, but didn't wake. He lifted her against his shoulder, grabbed her backpack and his own battered duffel, locked the car with his elbow, and carried everything, daughter bags and 3 years of exhaustion, through the diner's glass door. The bell above it chimed. Nobody looked up. The Crossroads. Diner smelled like coffee, bacon grease, and something sweet, maybe pie. Maybe just the memory of pie. The fluorescent lights were the kind that hummed just low enough to be annoying after 20 minutes and unbearable after an hour. A country song played from a radio somewhere behind the counter, turned down so low you could barely make out the words. David scanned the room in the time it took most people to pull off their jackets. Corner booth occupied by an elderly couple. The man was mostly bald and had the look of a retired tradesman. Thick hands wrapped around a coffee mug. The woman was reading something on her phone with reading glasses perched at the end of her nose. Not a threat. Not relevant. Good sightlines to the door. Center table 4 men who worked together. Work boots, dirty jeans, that particular kind of comfortable silence that said they'd eaten together 100 times. Construction crew, most likely. Off the clock. Tired. Nobody looking for trouble. Counter stools 2. A woman in her 40s with paint-stained fingers, nursing a slice of lemon meringue, and a heavy-set man in a trucker cap watching a game on the TV mounted above the coffee station. 2 staff visible. A waitress, mid-30s, red hair, pulled back, name tag said Patrice, who moved with the efficient fatigue of someone who'd been on her feet since noon. A cook visible through the pass-through, big arms, gray beard, moving steadily through the back. One camera above the register. Angle covered the front half of the diner. The back booths were a blind spot. David chose a booth in the back. He laid Emma down gently across the bench seat on the far side, tucked her backpack under her head as a pillow, and draped his jacket over her shoulders. She shifted, made a small sound, and settled again. He sat across from her, his back to the wall, his eyes on the door. Patrice appeared at his elbow almost immediately. "Well, aren't you sweet?" she said, nodding at Emma with a tired smile. "Long drive." "Yeah." "You want coffee?" Please. She want anything when she wakes up. David looked at his daughter. Chocolate milk, if you've got it. Honey, this is Pennsylvania. We've always got chocolate milk. She pulled out her notepad. You eating? Whatever's fast. Club sandwich. We can do that in 6 minutes. That works. She wrote it down without looking at her pad the way people do when they've taken the same order 1,000 times. Started to leave, then paused. You just passing through or just passing through? She nodded. Something in her face said she recognized that particular answer, the one that really meant, please don't ask me anything else. She gave him a small nod and moved back toward the counter. David put both hands flat on the table, exhaled once through his nose, and let his shoulders drop a half-inch. That was as relaxed as he got anymore. He'd been out of the Navy for 3 years, 4 months, and he didn't count the days anymore. That was progress according to the therapist he'd seen exactly twice before, deciding the drive was too far, and Emma needed new shoes more than he needed to talk about his feelings to a stranger in a beige office. 15 years in naval special warfare, 8 deployments, 4 different theaters of operation. He'd gone places that didn't officially exist, done things that would never appear on any public record, alongside men whose names he still couldn't say out loud in certain company. He had been very good at his job. What he was not good at, what nobody had trained him for, what no amount of cold water conditioning or sleep deprivation or close quarters combat practice had prepared him for, was being a father. Not because he didn't love it. He loved it so much it sometimes scared him the same way extreme altitude scared normal people. Too much too fast, the ground very far below. But there was no manual. There was no team. There was no chain of command that made the decisions when Emma was running a 103-degree fever at 2 in the morning and the only pediatric urgent care was 40 minutes away, and she was crying, and he was sitting on the bathroom floor with her saying things he'd never said in his life like, "It's okay, baby, Daddy's here," things that felt enormous and insufficient at the same time. And his ex-wife had left when Emma was 3. That was a story David didn't tell at diners or anywhere else. What mattered was that Emma had stayed with him. What mattered was that when the court date was over and the paperwork was signed and the door closed for the last time, David had looked at his daughter sitting on the kitchen floor building a block tower and had made a decision so clear and total that it felt less like a choice and more like a change in the weather. She is what I'm for now. Full stop. Mission parameters updated. All prior objectives retired. He'd moved them from Virginia Beach to his mother's town in rural Pennsylvania, taken a job doing security consulting for a regional firm, the kind of work that used about 8% of his actual skill set, and paid about 40% of what it should have, and settled into a life that looked from the outside like nothing special. Faded gray hoodie, old pickup truck, single dad at the school pickup line, the one who always showed up 3 minutes early and stood slightly apart from the other parents, not unfriendly, just quiet, watchful, still. People in Stone Creek liked David fine. They just didn't think about him much. Which was, as far as David was concerned, exactly right. He was most of the way through his coffee when Emma woke up. She sat up on the bench seat, blinked at the fluorescent lights, looked at her father and said with the complete seriousness of a 6-year-old arriving at an important conclusion, "I'm hungry." "I know," David said. "I ordered you chocolate milk." She considered this. "And food. There's a sandwich coming. You can have half." She looked at him with an expression that said half was an opening position, not a final offer. He almost smiled. "You want to sit up here?" he asked. She climbed off her bench and came around to his side, pressing against his arm, still warm and heavy with sleep. He put his arm around her automatically, and she leaned into his shoulder and looked around the diner with the wide-open curiosity that she brought to everything. "Where are we?" "Pennsylvania." "Is that far?" "Far from what?" She thought about it. "Home." "This is home," David said. "Right here, where I am. That's home." She looked up at him. "That's what you always say. Because it's always true." Patrice brought the chocolate milk and set it in front of Emma with a little flourish, and Emma said thank you with the careful seriousness of a child who had been drilled on manners, and Patrice said, "You're very welcome, sweetheart," and went back to the counter. David's sandwich arrived. He cut it in half, pushed the larger half toward Emma, and they ate in the comfortable silence of two people who have been each other's primary company for long enough that silence doesn't need to be filled. It was 11:14 p.m. At 11:19 the door opened. David heard them before he fully registered them. Not a sound exactly, the bell above the door, yes, and the cold air that moved through the diner from the open door, but a quality of entry. The way three men can walk into a room and displace it. He looked up. Mighty, three men, all between 25 and 35. The first one through the door, tallest, broadest, wearing a dark green jacket, moved to his left immediately and positioned himself with his back to the wall and a clear view of the room. The second one came in close behind and went right toward the counter toward the register. The third shortest of the three, restless energy, hood up, hands in his pockets, held the door for exactly 1 beat too long, looking out into the parking lot, then let it close and move toward the center of the room. They didn't look at the menu board. They didn't sit down. The tallest one made eye contact with the second one across the room. A nod. Small. Practiced. 3 seconds. David thought. I've been looking at them for 3 seconds and I already know. Under the table, without changing his expression, without adjusting his posture, he slipped his phone from his pocket. Opened his contacts. 3 taps. He'd set up an emergency contact protocol years ago, old habit, that sent a pre-written text to the local non-emergency police number with his GPS coordinates and one word, now. He sent it. Put the phone away. Looked down at his sandwich. Emma was still eating, watching the room with the mild, unworried curiosity of a child who didn't know what worried meant yet. Hey, David said quietly. You remember the game we play? Emma looked up. The quiet game. No, the other one. She thought. The listening game. That's the one. I'm going to need you to play it right now. Okay, just eat and listen and don't look around. You can do that. She read his face the way children read their parents, completely instinctively, without being able to articulate what they were reading. Something shifted in her expression. She looked back at her sandwich. Okay, Daddy. Good girl. The tallest man, David, was already thinking of him as Green Jacket, pulled a gun from inside his coat and held it down at his side, not pointing it yet, just showing it. Everybody stay where you are. His voice was loud but controlled. Practiced. We don't want to hurt anyone. We want the register and whatever's in the safe in the back. Nobody does anything stupid. Everybody goes home tonight. The diner froze. The elderly woman dropped her phone. The construction workers pushed back from their table, instinctively, chairs scraping. The woman at the counter made a sound like she'd been punched in the chest. The man in the trucker cap put both hands up immediately and said nothing. Patrice was behind the counter. She'd gone very still, the coffee carafe still in her hand, staring at the gun. 4 seconds, David thought, from entry to display. They planned this. They've done it before. He did not move. He sat back slightly in the booth, relaxed his hands flat on the table, and let his eyes do the work. Green Jacket was holding near the front of the room, command position, clear view of everyone. The second man, gray hoodie, had moved directly to the register and was saying something to Patrice in a low voice that David couldn't make out. The third man, short guy, was moving through the center of the room, slowly watching the customers, his right hand still in his jacket pocket. Short guy reached the construction workers' table and stopped. Phones, wallets, put them on the table, now. One of the workers, younger, maybe 22, the kind of age where adrenaline makes you stupid, sat forward. Man, I don't. I will not say it again. Hey. One of the older workers put a hand on the young guy's arm. Don't, just give it to him. Smart man. Smart. David watched short guy move away from the construction table, pocketing phones, and turned his attention to Green Jacket, who was scanning the room with the systematic thoroughness of a man checking boxes. His gaze swept across David's booth, stopped, moved on. David had counted on that. There was nothing about him, the hoodie, the tired posture, the child against his shoulder, that registered as a threat. He'd spent a career practicing the specific skill of being looked at without being seen. Green Jacket glanced at his guy at the register, then back across the room, and a small smile crossed his face. Easy. All of it was easy. 12 people in a diner at 11 at night, not a fighter among them. His gaze drifted back to David one more time. The smile widened slightly. David dropped his eyes to the table. Deferential. Harmless. Nothing there. That's right, he thought. Keep looking. Hey, Dad. David's eyes cut sideways. Short Guy had stopped at the end of their booth. He was looking at David with the particular kind of contempt that some men carry like a second wallet, always available, always ready. Wallet, Short Guy said. And whatever's in that bag. David looked at him, not challenging, not frightened either, just looking. I've got $38, David said. And crayons. You want the crayons? They're yours. Short Guy's jaw tightened. He glanced at Emma, then back at David, and something ugly flickered in his expression. Not softness, not sympathy, just calculation. A quick assessment. A conclusion. Nobody to worry about. Don't be funny, Short Guy said. Wallet, now. David reached into his jacket pocket slowly enough to telegraph that there was no threat in the movement, and placed his wallet on the table. Short Guy grabbed it, opened it, looked at the cash, made a sound of disgust, and dropped it again. That's it, he said. That's it. Short Guy leaned down slightly, putting himself at David's level close enough that David could smell cigarette smoke and something chemical underneath it. He lowered his voice. You know what? You're smart to stay quiet. You've got the kid. You just sit there and be a good little daddy, and we're out of here in 5 minutes, and you can go back to... He glanced at Emma's sandwich with a small sneer. Whatever this is. David said nothing. Short Guy straightened up, satisfied, and moved on. Emma had not looked up from her plate. She was still eating slowly, methodically, the way David had taught her to move through uncomfortable situations, steady like you're pouring water, not spilling it. David watched Short Guy move toward the elderly couple and felt something cold and very clear settle in his chest. Not anger, not fear. Clarity. The kind that came for David only in the most serious moments. The moments when the variables locked down and the noise fell away, and everything reduced to geometry, angles and distances and timing. He looked at the room, looked at all 3 men and their positions. He looked at Patrice behind the counter. He looked at the door. Then he looked at his daughter. She was looking back at him, her dark eyes very steady, very calm. She trusted him completely. That was the thing about Emma, she trusted him the same way she trusted the floor to hold her weight. Without question, without drama, simply and totally. And in that trust, David felt the weight of everything he was and everything he'd put away and everything he'd chosen since the day he walked out of that Virginia Beach courtroom with his daughter's hand in his. He'd chosen quiet. He'd chosen ordinary. He'd chosen the gray hoodie and the $38 and the half sandwich and the long drives and the homework and the chocolate milk and the beautiful, relentless smallness of a peaceful life. And he would have held that choice all the way to the door if the night had given him any other option. It didn't. At 11:26 p.m., Gray Hoodie came out from behind the register counter. He had the cash drawer. He also had Patrice. His left arm was around her shoulders, not gently, and he was walking her toward the center of the room, and Patrice was trying very hard not to cry, and not quite succeeding, and he was saying something to Green Jacket across the room about a safe in the back and a manager who needed to open it. There's no manager here tonight, Patrice said. Her voice shook, but she held it together. I'm the senior staff. I don't have the combination to the... Gray Hoodie tightened his arm. Try again. I'm telling you the truth, He pulled her closer and pressed the barrel of his gun against her temple. The room lurched. Someone gasped. The young construction worker half rose from his chair, and the older one grabbed his arm again and held on. David was already moving. Not from his seat yet. Not yet, but something in him had already made the decision, and the countdown had already begun, and every breath from this moment forward was measured and intentional. He looked at Green Jacket, nearest armed threat, closest to him, 7 feet. He looked at Short Guy, moving toward the back of the room now, toward the pass-through, probably to find the cook. Away from David. That was good. One variable removed from the opening sequence. He looked at Gray Hoodie, gun pressed to Patrice's temple, 4 feet away from the end of David's booth. He looked at his daughter one last time. "Emma," he said, very quiet, just her name. She met his eyes. "Get under the table. Put your hands over your ears. Don't come out until I say your name." She looked at him for one long second. Then she slid off the seat and disappeared below the table without a sound, pulling her backpack with her, and David heard the small thump of her settling against the floor. "Good girl." He stood up. And here is what the people in that diner saw in the seconds that followed. They saw the man from the back booth, the nobody, the single dad, the guy with the $38, and the sleeping kid stand up from his seat with a movement so quiet and controlled it didn't seem like a man standing up at all. It seemed like something unfolding, something that had been held very still for a very long time and had now finally been allowed to move. They saw him cover the distance between himself and Gray Hoodie in 2 steps. They saw his left hand come up and deflect the gun, redirect it fast and precise away from Patrice's head and past his own body, while his right hand drove Gray Hoodie's gun arm downward, with a force that snapped the man's wrist before he fully registered that anything was happening. They heard the gun hit the floor. They heard Gray Hoodie make a sound they would not easily forget. Bow. And then David's right elbow found the man's jaw, and Gray Hoodie's legs went out from under him, and he was on the floor, and David already had the gun. 4 seconds. Maybe 5. Green Jacket had turned and raised his weapon and was pointing it at David across the room, and his face had changed completely, all the easy confidence gone, replaced by something that looked almost like confusion, the expression of a man whose entire calculation of the room had just been destroyed. "Don't," David said. Just that. One word, flat and certain. The voice of a man who has said "don't" in rooms far more dangerous than this, and been listened to every time. Green Jacket's aim didn't waver, but his eyes did. "Drop it," David said. "I'm not asking again." The room was perfectly, terrifyingly silent. And then, Short Guy came back from the rear of the diner, and he saw the scene. Gray Hoodie on the floor, David standing with the gun. Green Jacket frozen, and Short Guy went for his own weapon, and David was already turning. And what happened next was over before Short Guy's weapon cleared his waistband. 3 men had walked into the Crossroads diner that night, armed and certain. None of them left that way. When the police arrived 8 minutes after David's text lights and sirens, 2 cruisers and then a third, they found 3 men on the diner floor, zip-tied with the plastic restraints from the cook's supply closet, and David Walker sitting back in his booth in the faded gray hoodie, with a cup of coffee going cold in front of him. Emma was back on the seat beside him. She was eating her sandwich. One of the officers, young, maybe 26, hand still on his service weapon, came to the booth and looked at the scene and looked at David and said, "Sir, are you?" "Fine," David said. "She's fine. Everyone's fine." He nodded toward the other customers. "You'll want to get statements from the folks at the center table. The elderly couple is going to need someone to sit with them for a while. The woman at the counter was hit pretty hard by the adrenaline. She might need medical." "Yay," the officer stared at him. "How did you—" "The guy with the broken wrist is going to need to go to hospital before booking. The other 2 are unhurt." David picked up his coffee. "There's a gun under the edge of the counter over there where it slid when I went for it. You'll want to log that separately." The officer was still staring. David looked at him calmly. "You have questions. I understand. I'll be here." He looked back at Emma, who had finished her half of the sandwich and was now looking pointedly at the remaining half on David's plate. He slid it toward her. "Still hungry?" he asked. She picked it up. "I thought you were going to eat that." "Changed my mind." She accepted this with the equanimity of a child accustomed to her father's mysteries, and David sat back against the booth and watched the red and blue lights paint the diner windows and listened to the officers and the witnesses and the sounds of a room coming slowly, unevenly back to itself. Outside, someone was on a radio. Inside, Patrice was sitting on a counter stool with both hands wrapped around a mug that one of the construction workers had poured for her, and she was crying quietly, and the older construction worker was patting her shoulder and saying something low and kind. Green Jacket was staring at the ceiling from his position on the floor. His wrists bound his expression, the dull, hollowed-out look of a man reassessing everything he thought he knew. Short Guy had said nothing since David had put him down. He hadn't moved either. David drank his coffee. And nobody in that room, not the officers, not the witnesses, not the three men on the floor, could quite put together what they had just seen. The shape of it was clear enough. The speed had been unmistakable. The result was undeniable. But the man himself, the man who had done it, was sitting in a back booth in a faded gray hoodie, watching his 6-year-old daughter eat a club sandwich, and he looked exactly like what he'd looked like when he walked in. Just a dad. Just tired. Just passing through. None of them knew yet what was coming. None of them knew that the three men on that floor were not what they appeared to be, and neither, it would turn out, was the quiet man in the corner booth. That part of the story was still waiting outside in the dark in the parking lot in the unmarked sedans that were already rolling toward the Crossroads Diner, and it would change everything. The unmarked sedans arrived at 11:41 p.m., and David noticed them before any of the uniformed officers did. 2 vehicles, dark blue government plates, the kind of plates that looked like regular Pennsylvania registration, but sat slightly too clean on cars that were slightly too anonymous. They pulled into the Crossroads parking lot without lights, which told him everything he needed to know about who was driving them. He set down his coffee cup. "Daddy?" Emma was watching his face. "It's okay," he said. "Just more people coming to help." She looked at the windows where the red and blue pulse from the patrol cars still painted everything in alternating color. "There's a lot of people helping." "Yeah," David said. "There are." "Yeah." He watched the doors of both sedans open. 4 people got out. 3 men and a woman, all in dark clothing, all moving with the particular kind of purposeful restraint that meant they were armed, trained, and very much not local law enforcement. The woman reached the diner door first. She was maybe 40, short dark hair, the kind of face that gave nothing away without effort. She held the door open and let one of the men pass her older heavyset, with a silver badge holder clipped to his belt, and then she came in behind him, and her eyes went directly across the room to David's booth. Not to the 3 men on the floor, not to the officers taking statements. Directly to David. He'd been found like that before, by people who knew exactly where to look. The heavy-set man walked to the officer in charge, a sergeant named Braddock, who'd arrived with the 2nd Cruiser, and had the weary competence of someone 22 years into a job that never got easier. They spoke in low voices. David couldn't hear the words, but he didn't need to. He watched Braddock's face go from professional courtesy to something more careful, more deferential, the way faces do when authority changes hands in a room. Braddock nodded once, stepped back, and the heavy-set man turned toward the back booth. David picked up his coffee again. It was cold. He drank it anyway. The man stopped at the edge of the booth and looked at David for a moment with the expression of someone who had been briefed extensively and was now recalibrating the briefing against reality. He was maybe 55. The kind of face that had seen enough to stop being surprised by things and then been surprised anyway and learned to keep that surprise off its surface. "Mr. Walker," he said. "That's me." My name is Gerald Mack. I'm with the Federal Bureau of Investigation Field Office out of Pittsburgh. He held out his badge. David glanced at it without touching it. I need to speak with you privately. My daughter's sitting right here, David said. I understand that. Is there someone who can... No, David said. There isn't. Mack looked at Emma. Emma looked at Mack with the calm, assessing stare of a 6-year-old who had not yet learned that staring was rude and had, in David's personal opinion, no particular reason to learn it. Mack looked back at David. Can she? She's heard things before, David said. She doesn't repeat them. Say what you need to say. Something shifted in Mack's expression. Not irritation, closer to respect, maybe the grudging kind. He pulled out the bench across from David and Emma and sat down heavily and folded his hands on the table. The 3 men you detained tonight, Mack said. You understand that we've been watching them. I figured. For 11 months. David said nothing. They're not small time, Mack continued. The robbery was a cover. A reason to be in the building to case it, to interact with specific individuals. We believe we're going to be here tonight. He paused. There was a meeting scheduled, in the back of this diner, at midnight. We had intelligence that a handoff was going to occur, military-grade encrypted hardware stolen from a defense contractor in Maryland 6 weeks ago. He let that sit. Your intervention disrupted the meeting before it could happen. The people they were supposed to meet, they saw the patrol cars and they ran. David looked at him. So I ruined your operation. You... Mack stopped. Started again. You complicated it. But those 3 are in custody. Yes. Which means you can work with that. Mack's jaw moved slightly. We could have had the whole network. Or, David said, you could have had a hostage situation and 3 dead civilians and a waitress who never went home. He kept his voice completely level. The handoff wasn't going to happen clean. Those men were escalating. They had a plan, and it was coming apart at the edges. You'd have lost the room before midnight. Mack stared at him. You were watching the building, David said. You saw how they positioned themselves when they came in. You saw the gun come out. What was your timeline for entry? Mack said nothing. Because the gun was at her head, David said. And that's the moment your timeline stops mattering. A long silence sat between them. Emma had stopped eating and was looking very carefully at the table the way children do when they are listening with their whole body and trying to appear as if they are not. Finally, Mack said, What was your MOS? I was Navy. I know you were Navy. What was your rate? David looked at him. Mack looked back. SO, David said. Special Warfare Operator. Mack nodded slowly. He'd already known. David could see that. This was confirmation, not discovery. And after, I got out. I raised my daughter. 3 years ago. 3 years, 4 months. Mack unfolded his hands and placed them flat on the table, a gesture that felt deliberate, almost formal. Mr. Walker, the security footage from this building is going to be reviewed by multiple agencies. What you did tonight, the speed of it, the precision, it's going to raise questions. It already has. He leaned forward slightly. I need to understand who I'm talking to before those questions get asked in rooms I can't control. You're talking to a single father who stopped a robbery, David said. You know that's not all you are. David said nothing. Mack waited. Then slowly, deliberately, David set his coffee cup down, moved it to one side, and looked at Gerald Mack with an expression that was neither friendly nor hostile. Something older than both. Something that had been forged in rooms and places and circumstances that most people in this diner couldn't have imagined and wouldn't have survived. What do you need from me? David said. Mack exhaled. Start with tonight. Walk me through it. Everything. David looked at his daughter. Emma, do you want to go sit with Patrice for a little while? Emma looked at Patrice, who was still on the counter stool, the construction worker still beside her, the mug now empty. She looked back at her father. Is she sad? Yeah, baby. She's had a hard night. Emma slid off the seat. She walked across the diner with the small, serious dignity of a child on a mission, climbed up onto the stool beside Patrice, and said something David couldn't hear. Patrice looked down at her, and something in Patrice's face changed, softened completely, the way faces do when a child offers you something you didn't know you needed. Patrice put her arm around Emma's shoulders, and Emma leaned into her, and Patrice held on. David watched for a moment. Then he turned back to Mac. All right, he said, and he talked. He walked Mac through it the same way he'd been trained to debrief chronological specific, no editorializing. Entry time, positioning, threat assessment, the text, Emma, the gun to Patrice's head, the decision point, the sequence. He left nothing out and added nothing extra, and when he finished, the diner had gone quieter around them, and Mac had not taken a single note because he hadn't needed to. The woman, who had moved to a position near the counter at some point during the conversation, had a small recorder in her hand. When David finished, Mac was quiet for a moment. You assessed all three in under 4 seconds, he said. 3, David said. Maybe. And you waited. Of course I waited. Most people trained the way you're trained, they don't wait. They act on the first threat indicator. Most people trained the way I'm trained don't have a 6-year-old under the table, David said. Mac looked at him for a long moment. What made you decide the gun to the waitress's head was the moment? David thought about how to explain it to someone who hadn't been there in those particular seconds, holding that particular stillness. The way time folds in moments like that. Not slow motion, nothing like the movies, but sharper, more concentrated. The way a decision doesn't feel like a decision at all, but like an arrival. Because I was going to run out of good options, David said. If the third man had come back from the kitchen before I moved, if Green Jacket had gotten a better angle, if she'd fought him, and he'd panicked. He shook his head. You wait for the right moment, and then you move the moment it appears. That was it. Green Jacket, Mac said. That's what you were calling him. I had to call them something. Do you know his actual name? No. His name is Terrence Boyle. He has a federal record going back 8 years. The man with the broken wrist is Kyle Drummond. The third one, the one you called Short Guy, is Marcus Trent. Mac paused. Trent served. Army, not special operations, but he served. Honorable discharge 7 years ago. Then he fell into some things. He let that sit. Does that change anything for you? David looked at his hands. No, he said quietly. He pointed a gun at my daughter's table. Whatever he was before that, it doesn't change what he did. I'm not asking you to forgive him. I know you're not. David looked up. Is this going somewhere, Agent Mac? Because I'd like to get Emma to a bed at some point tonight. Mac looked at the table, then back at David, and what he said next, David hadn't expected it. He'd expected a request for a formal statement, a summons, a timeline, the bureaucratic machinery of an investigation that was going to grind forward with or without his cooperation. What Mac said was, we lost track of the hardware. David went still. The encrypted module stolen from the Maryland contractor, Mac said. We had intelligence that it was going to be here tonight. Whoever was supposed to receive it, they made us and they ran. Which means they still have it. Which means it's moving. He paused. And it's military-grade encryption hardware, Mr. Walker. The kind that in the wrong hands can be used to compromise the communication systems of active naval vessels. The air in the booth changed. David heard it differently now. The background noise of the diner, the police radios, Emma's small voice talking to Patrice. All of it moved to a different layer, and in the foreground, there was only what Mac had just said. Active naval vessels. David had spent 15 years operating from those vessels. He knew men, good men, solid men, the best men he'd known in his life, who were on those vessels right now. Tonight. Wherever they were in the world. How compromised, David said. His voice was very quiet. Enough that if someone with the right knowledge reverse-engineered the encryption key. Mac stopped. Enough. And you're telling me this because you disrupted the handoff, Mac said, and because whoever was going to receive it now knows that this location is burned. They're going to move fast. Reroute. We have a window that is going to close very quickly, and I need people who understand the tactical picture in a way my field agents don't. He met David's eyes. I'm not asking you to come back. I'm asking you to consult. Help us understand the threat model. Help us figure out where this goes next. David looked at him for a long time. The booth was very quiet. From across the room, Emma's voice carried, "Do you have a little girl?" She was talking to Patrice, and Patrice said, "I have a boy. He's 12. And Emma said very seriously, "That's a big boy." And Patrice laughed a real laugh, surprised out of her the first one, since everything went wrong tonight. David heard it. He thought about 15 years, about the cold water and the sleep deprivation, and the men he'd served beside, and the ones who hadn't come home, and the ones who had come home changed in ways that didn't have words yet. He thought about what he'd set down when he walked away. He thought about what he'd picked up instead. He thought about active naval vessels, about the men on them tonight, about the frequency of a communication system being compromised in the middle of an operation in the middle of water with no warning. One condition, David said. Mac leaned forward slightly. Name it. Emma doesn't go into the system. No file, no record, nothing connecting her to any of this. She's a child. She stays invisible. Done. I mean it, Mac. If I find out, I understand what you mean, Mac said. Done. Agreed. You have my word and I'll put it in writing if you want it in writing. David looked at him. I don't need it in writing, David said. But understand that if that changes, it won't. Another silence. David watched Emma say something that made the construction worker laugh. She had that quality, had always had it, of walking into rooms where people were suffering and finding the exact right thing to offer. He didn't know where she'd gotten it. He was reasonably certain she hadn't gotten it from him. One more thing, David said. Mac waited. I'm done by morning, David said. Whatever you need from me, analysis, threat assessment, tactical overview. We work through the night if we have to, but at sunrise, I drive her home and I go back to my life. Understood? Mac looked at him steadily. Understood. David nodded once, slid out of the booth, walked across the diner to where Emma was sitting with Patrice, bent down, and said quietly into Emma's ear, Hey, Bug, I have to go talk to some people for a little while. There's a really nice officer over there who's going to sit with you. Is that okay? Emma looked at him. Are you going to fix something? The question hit him somewhere below the sternum. He held very still for a beat. Yeah, he said. That's the idea. She nodded, like that settled it, like that was all she needed to know. He straightened up, spoke briefly to a young female officer who'd been standing near the door, watched her take a seat beside Emma, and then walked back to the booth where Gerald Mack was on his phone, low-voiced and urgent. Mack looked up, ended the call. My team has a vehicle outside, he said. We've got a mobile command unit 2 miles east. We can work there. Let's go, David said. They moved toward the door. The 3 men on the floor watched David pass. Green Jacket Terrence Boyle tracked him with the hollow expression of a man who was still trying to understand what had happened to him. Short guy Marcus Trent said nothing. Drummond's wrist had been wrapped by a paramedic who'd arrived with the 3rd cruiser, and he was staring at the floor. David didn't look at any of them. He pushed through the diner door, and the cold Pennsylvania night came at him all at once. The smell of it, diesel and cut grass, and something damp and distant that meant rain coming, and he stood on the sidewalk for a moment and looked up at the sky. Stars. Not many. Clouds coming in from the west. The woman with the recorder was beside him. I'm Special Agent Dana Rice, she said. I'll be working with you tonight. David Walker, I know who you are, she said. Not unfriendly, matter of fact. How much do you actually know? He asked. She paused. Enough to understand why you didn't flinch. He looked at her. I flinch, he said. I just do it after. She held his gaze for a moment, and then something that wasn't quite a smile moved across her face. The vehicle's this way. They walked across the parking lot. The red and blue lights were still pulsing against the diner windows. Inside, through the glass, David could see Emma's silhouette on the counter stool, still talking to Patrice, completely unrattled by a night that had rattled every adult in the building. He watched her for one more second. Then he turned away. Inside the mobile command unit, a black SUV, with the rear seats removed and replaced with 2 laptops, a communications panel, and a fold-out table, Mac laid out what they had. Surveillance photos, wire transcripts, a timeline spanning 11 months, the Maryland theft, a defense contractor substation outside Annapolis, a 3-man security bypass that had been so clean it had taken investigators 6 days to realize the hardware was gone. Then the trail partial broken, pieced together from informant reports and financial forensics, moving the stolen module across 3 states. David sat with his forearms on the fold-out table and looked at everything Mac put in front of him. You're looking for a logistician, David said. Not a weapons guy. This isn't about selling it to a foreign actor directly that's too slow, too exposed. Someone is moving it through intermediaries, breaking the chain of custody into smaller links so that even if one link gets pulled, the rest of the chain survives. He looked up. Which is why you couldn't close the net tonight, even though you knew the handoff was happening. Mac looked at Rice. Rice looked at David. That's consistent with what we have, she said carefully. So you know it already. We suspected. Then you know where the next link is, David said. Because a logistician doesn't improvise. They have contingencies. If the primary handoff fails, the module goes to a fallback, something pre-planned, pre-positioned. He looked at the map on the left screen, Pennsylvania, Maryland, the corridor down to the coast. You pulled Boyle and Drummond and Trent. Whoever was waiting at midnight, they're already moving. They had a vehicle. They had a route. Where does it go? Max said something to Rice in a low voice. Rice opened a file on the right laptop and turned the screen toward David. David looked at it. His jaw tightened. That's a naval installation, he said. The hardware is ultimately destined for a buyer who has existing access to that installation, Max said. Someone on the inside. The words landed in the mobile unit with the weight of something very heavy being dropped from a very great height. David sat back, put his hands on the table, looked at the installation name on the screen, and felt something move through him that had nothing to do with training or tactics or threat assessment. Something older, something that lived below all of that. He knew that installation, yet he'd deployed from that installation 6 times. He knew its pier layout, its security checkpoints, its duty rotation schedule. He knew men who slept on that base right now tonight under the same cloudy Pennsylvania sky. How far inside? David said. Mac was quiet for a beat too long. How far inside Mac? We don't know yet. The intelligence is, it's not confirmed. But the profile suggests someone with access to the communications division. David looked at the screen for a long time. The installation name sat there in clean digital type as if it were just information, as if it were just words. You're going to need someone who knows the layout, David said. Yes. And the personnel culture, the chain of command, the blind spots. Yes. And that's why I'm in this van instead of home with my daughter. Mac said nothing. Outside rain began. David could hear it on the roof of the vehicle light at first, then steadier. The sound of it was almost peaceful, the way rain usually was, the way it usually settled something in his chest. Not tonight. I told you I'd be done by morning, David said. I know what you told me. That hasn't changed, David said. But if you're asking me whether I understand what's at stake. He looked at Mac directly. I understand exactly what's at stake. Mac met his eyes. I know you do. That's why you're here. Rice slid a notepad across the table. A printed document, 2 pages dense type. Non-disclosure. Temporary consultant agreement. All the language that meant the government was acknowledging his existence for this specific purpose and no other. David looked at it without touching it. Pen, he said. Mac produced one. So, David picked up the first page and read every word of it, not quickly, thoroughly, the way he'd been taught to read anything that could put his name on something that couldn't be undone. Rice didn't rush him. Mac didn't rush him. The rain came down on the roof of the vehicle. When he finished the second page, he signed in 2 places, dated it, and pushed it back across the table. Mac took it, looked at the signature, looked at David. One more thing I need to tell you, Mac said. David waited. Boyle, in the diner. Before we arrived. Mac paused. He made a call, from his cell phone. One call 40 seconds before the officers on scene secured the phones. We pulled the number. And the call went to a burner, untraceable so far, but the tower it pinged. Mac reached across and zoomed the map on the left screen. A red circle appeared. A radius. David stared at it. The tower was 2 miles from where Emma was sitting right now. The cold that moved through David Walker in that moment had nothing to do with the weather. He made the call after you detained him, Mac said carefully. We don't know what he said. We don't know if he identified you. We don't know if... You don't know if whoever is on the other end of that call now knows who I am, David said. No, we don't. Or that I have a daughter. Mac was quiet. Way. David looked at the red circle on the screen, looked at the radius of it, looked at the distance markers, did math that he didn't want to do, but couldn't stop doing. I need to make a call, David said. Of course. He took out his phone, scrolled to the young officer's number that he'd taken before leaving the diner. Pressed call. It rang. Rang again. On the third ring, the officer answered. Officer Daniels. This is David Walker. My daughter Emma is with you. Yes, sir. She's right here. I need you to move her, David said. His voice was completely controlled, completely flat. Away from the windows, to the back of the building. Don't explain why. Just tell her Daddy said it's time to go find somewhere cozy. She'll come with you. A pause. Do it now. Stay on the line while you do it. So. He could hear Daniels move, could hear Emma's voice. Where are we going? And Daniels saying something easy casual, the way David had asked her to. He could hear footsteps, and then a door, and then the sound quality changed slightly. The background hum of the diner receding. We're in the back, Daniel said. Kitchen area. Cozy enough. Good, David said. Don't leave her, no matter what. Understood, Mr. Walker. I'll be back before long. He ended the call. Put the phone face down on the table. Looked at Gerald Mack with an expression that had moved past everything secondary and arrived at something primary. Something that was no longer about military hardware or federal investigations or criminal networks or anything that lived on the clean side of a printed document. You have 45 minutes, David said. Tell me everything you know, all of it, nothing held back. Mac looked at him, looked at the face across the table, the face of a man who had just signed a consultant agreement but had already privately, independently made a completely different kind of commitment. The kind that didn't require paperwork. All right, Mac said. And the rain came down, and the mobile unit hummed, and 2 miles away, in the back of a Pennsylvania diner, a 6-year-old girl sat in a kitchen and told a police officer about the listening game and about how her daddy always came back. He always came back. She'd never had a reason to think otherwise. Not yet. Mac talked for 38 minutes straight. He laid it out the way federal agents lay things out when they finally stop hedging, flat fast, and without mercy for the listener. 11 months of surveillance, 42 separate intercepts. A criminal network that had grown around the edges of 3 different ongoing investigations, without ever becoming the center of any of them, always peripheral, always adjacent, always just outside the frame when the camera was pointed somewhere else. The stolen hardware officially designated in the case file as Module 7 Echo was a quantum-encrypted communications processor. Civilian translation, a device that once reverse-engineered, could allow someone with the right technical knowledge to generate valid encryption keys for a class of naval communication systems currently deployed on 6 active vessels in the Atlantic. Not hypothetically. Not eventually. Currently. Tonight. The men on those ships were using those systems right now to transmit coordinates, operational orders, personnel movements. David listened to all of it without interrupting. When Mac finished, the mobile unit was quiet except for the rain. "Who built the network?" David said. "We don't have a name. We have a designation. Our informant inside the network calls him the architect. Nobody below a certain tier has ever seen him directly. He communicates through cutouts, always at least 3 layers removed from any transaction. Age: unknown. Military background." Mac hesitated. "Almost certainly." "Because of the operational security." "Because of the operational security," Mac confirmed. "The way the network compartmentalizes, the way it uses cutouts, the way the handoff protocols are structured, it matches a particular training framework. Not civilian criminal methodology. Someone who learned this in a context where getting caught meant dying, not prosecution." David looked at the map on the screen. "So you're looking for someone who came out the same door I came out of. Or a similar door. That narrows it." "Not as much as you'd think. There are a lot of doors like that." David knew that was true. He said nothing. Rice leaned forward. She'd been mostly quiet during Mac's briefing, listening, watching David's face with the focused attention of someone whose job was to read people. "The tower that Boyle's call pinged," she said. "We've had a team on it since we identified it. No unusual activity so far, but the call was 40 seconds. That's enough time to transmit a description, a license plate, a name." "Or a photograph," David said. Rice glanced at Mac. "The diner has exterior cameras," David said. "Parking lot coverage. My truck was in that lot for 40 minutes before everything went sideways. My plates are registered to me. My address is in Stone Creek. If Boyle sent that to anyone with resources..." He stopped. Did the math again. The same math he'd been doing since Mac told him about the call. "How long to run a plate?" "For someone with the architect's resources," Rice said. "Minutes." The word landed in the vehicle like a stone dropped in still water. 12:47 a.m. Emma had been in the back kitchen of the Crossroads Diner for 22 minutes. Officer Daniels was with her. The diner was still surrounded by patrol cars. That was enough for now, that was enough. But the radius of the tower's coverage area sat in David's mind like a lit fuse burning at a rate he couldn't precisely calculate. "I need to change the location," David said. "Chidi." Mac looked at him. "Emma. I'm not leaving her in a building with known addresses in a database and a burned phone call and a tower 2 miles out." His voice was completely controlled. It was the control that made it alarming, the specific flatness of a man who had moved past emotion into calculation. "You have a secure facility in the area." "We have..." "Not a satellite office, not a field station, somewhere without a public address, somewhere off the civilian map." Mac looked at Rice. Rice said, "There's a training facility outside Claymont, 23 miles northeast. We use it for witness protection staging. It's not on any registry." "Is it staffed tonight?" "It can be in 40 minutes." David looked at the time on the laptop screen. 12:49 a.m. He did the calculation, not the travel time, but the threat timeline. The gap between what Boyle's contact knew right now and what they could act on. That gap was closing. He could feel it closing the way he used to feel things closing in the field. Not a sound, not a sight, just a pressure. A change in the quality of the air. "Make the call," David said. "I want Emma moving in 10 minutes. Mac nodded to Rice. She was already on her phone. David took out his own phone and called Daniels again. "It's Walker. Change of plans. I need you to bring Emma outside to a vehicle, black SUV, government plates. It'll pull to the service entrance in the back in approximately 4 minutes. Do not use the front of the building. Side or rear exit only." "Understood," Daniels said. Her voice was steady. "Good. Is she okay?" "Tonight." A brief pause, and he could hear Emma in the background, and what he heard was her laughing at something, a genuine, unguarded laugh, the kind that comes from the stomach and has nothing performing in it. Whatever Daniels had done to keep her calm, it had worked. "She's explaining to me the rules of the listening game," Daniels said. David closed his eyes for 1 second. "Tell her Daddy's coming to get her." "I'll tell her." He ended the call and looked at Mac. "I want 2 vehicles. She goes in one, I go in the other, different routes." Mac studied him. "You think they're already mobile? I think a competent logistics operator with a burned handoff and 40 seconds of phone intel is going to be mobile before I can count on them not being. So yes." He paused. "Don't underestimate what that call represents. Boyle didn't call because he panicked. He called because it was protocol. He had instructions: if the operation is compromised, report what you saw. Whatever he saw in that diner, he reported it. And whoever received that report is now making decisions." Rice came back. "Claymont is up. We'll have 4 staff on site by the time we arrive." "Let's move," David said. He was out of the mobile unit and moving across the wet parking lot before Mac had fully stood up. The next 9 minutes were the kind of 9 minutes that compressed time too much, happening too fast to process sequentially, only fragments, the second vehicle pulling to the diner's service door. Emma, appearing in the doorway, with her backpack clutched to her chest, and her face tilted up against the rain, spotting David, and saying his name once. Just his name, and he was there in 4 steps, and she was against his shoulder, and he held her for exactly the amount of time he allowed himself. And then he said into her hair very quietly, "You're going with Officer Daniels in a car. I'm going to be right behind you." "Okay." She leaned back and looked at his face. 6 years old, dark eyes that missed nothing. "Are you in trouble?" she asked. "No bug? I'm helping someone." "Are they in trouble?" "A little bit." She considered this. "Okay." She reached up and touched his jaw, a gesture so old between them that neither of them thought about it anymore, just the particular weight of her small hand on the side of his face. "Don't be too long." "I won't." She let Daniels help her into the vehicle. The door closed. The vehicle moved. David watched it go. Then he turned and got into the second SUV, and Mac was beside him, and Rice was in the front, and the driver pulled out through the back lot and took a different route east away from the main road into the dark geography of rural Pennsylvania at 1 in the morning. David watched the side mirror. Watched the road behind them. Watched for headlights that moved with intention, that maintained distance too precisely, that appeared and disappeared in the rhythm of pursuit. Nothing. Or nothing he could confirm. That was different from nothing. "Walk me through the installation connection," David said. The vehicle was moving, and they were separated from Emma's vehicle by 2 miles of Pennsylvania back roads. And he needed to use the time, because time was the one thing he couldn't manufacture more of. And Mac opened a tablet. "The Naval Station, we believe the inside contact works in the communications division. Pay grade 03 or above based on the level of access implied by the intel. They have to be able to interface with the specific systems Module 7 Echo is designed to compromise. That narrows it to a pool of maybe 30 personnel. And your informant inside the network, can they identify the contact?" "Our informant doesn't have access to that tier of the operation. They were a runner, a logistics asset. They knew the handoff chain for the Maryland hardware, but nothing above it. Is the informant secure? A pause. Mac? We lost contact with the informant 6 hours ago, Mac said. The SUV was quiet for a moment. Define lost contact, David said. Missed a check-in, then a second. We have a team attempting to locate them. It may be routine communications issues happen in the field, or it may mean the architect already knows the handoff was compromised before Boyle's call, David said, which means someone inside your operation is also talking. The air in the vehicle changed. Rice turned from the front seat. Her expression confirmed it. She'd already thought this, or Mac had already told her, or both. That's a possibility we've been working with, Mac said carefully. A possibility, David said. Right. He looked out the window at the dark road. So you've got a compromised handoff, a missing informant, a potential leak inside your own team military hardware, moving through an unknown route, and an inside contact at a naval installation with access to active fleet communications. He paused. And you want a single dad from Stone Creek to help you think through the tactical picture. I want someone who isn't in my chain of command and can't be the leak, Mac said. Because whoever is talking, they're talking from inside that chain. David turned and looked at him. That's why it's you, Mac said. Not because of the diner. The diner just gave me a reason to put you in front of me tonight. You're outside the investigation. Your name doesn't appear anywhere in 11 months of case files. Whatever Boyle told his contact, they now know your name. Your plate's probably your address. But they don't know you're here. They don't know you're consulting. And they don't know what you know. Which right now is everything you've told me. Yes. Another silence. David felt the full weight of it, the specific gravity of being handed a problem too large for the hands it was being placed in, and knowing that was precisely why he was the one holding it. The vehicle slowed. A gate. Security lights. Rice lowered her window and exchanged words with a guard who was young and alert and armed and not in a uniform David recognized from any public agency. The gate opened. The Claymont facility was a converted agricultural property. David registered that much without needing to study it. The main building was a single-story, unremarkable from the road, but the interior had been systematically stripped and refitted. 4 rooms off a central corridor. Communication equipment. Secure terminals. The kind of lighting that meant people worked here through the night and the day looked the same inside either way. Emma's vehicle was already there. He could see Daniel standing near the entrance, which meant Emma was inside, which meant she was safe, and that single fact rearranged everything in David's chest back to a functional configuration. He went inside first, found Emma in a side room that someone had arranged with a cot and a blanket and a folding chair. She was sitting on the cot with her backpack in her lap, looking around the room with the evaluative expression of someone deciding whether or not to trust their accommodations. She looked up when David came in. "This place smells like a gym," she said. "Yeah," David said. "It kind of does." "Is this where we're sleeping? You're going to sleep here. I'm going to be down the hall." She looked at the cot, at the blanket, at him. "Will you stay until I fall asleep?" "Of course." He sat on the edge of the cot, and she lay down, and he pulled the blanket up to her chin, and she looked at the ceiling for a moment, with the particular expression of a child processing a night that had been far larger than any night had a right to be. "Daddy," she said. "Yeah." "Those men at the diner, were they bad?" He thought about how to answer that. He thought about Marcus Trent, who had served, who had gone through a door similar to the one David had gone through, and come out somewhere completely different. He thought about what Mac had said. He fell into some things, and the ease of that phrasing, the way it made catastrophic choices, sound like weather. "They made bad choices," David said. "Why?" I don't know, Bug. Sometimes people do. She was quiet. Then, did you stop them? Yeah. Good, she said simply, and closed her eyes. He sat with her until her breathing changed and deepened, and the small furrow between her eyebrows that she got when she was thinking hard finally smoothed out. He sat there 1 minute past that, because he always did, because he needed the extra minute more than she did. Then he stood up, carefully turned off the light, and walked down the hall to where Mac and Rice had set up at a table with 2 laptops and a secure phone line. Get to 2:14 a.m. Tell me about the fallback route, David said, sitting down. If the handoff was broken tonight, where does Module 7 Echo go? Walk me through every option you've modeled. Rice pulled up a map on the left screen. We've modeled 3 primary routes. The first goes south back toward Maryland, which would suggest the module is returning to a storage location near the point of origin. The second goes west into Ohio, which we've flagged because we have an existing associate of Boyle's known to operate out of Columbus. The third. She paused. The third, David said. Northeast, she said. Toward the coast. Toward the naval installation. That's the one, David said. You sound certain. A logistician with military training and an inside contact at the destination doesn't store the hardware. They move it. The fallback isn't a holding position, it's an accelerated delivery. The original plan got broken, so now the timeline compresses. They want this done before we can reconstitute our coverage. He looked at the northeast road on the map. How many checkpoints between here and the installation? 2 federal, 1 state, Rice said, but all 3 are highway-based. If they route through secondary roads. They will, David said. Then there's a corridor here. She drew a line on the screen with her finger cutting through a network of back roads that roughly paralleled Route 30 before angling toward the coast. No checkpoints. Low traffic at this hour. We've estimated a transit time of 3 hours and 40 minutes. David looked at the time on the screen. 2:16 a.m. 3 hours 40 minutes. We'll see. That put the hardware at the installation by approximately 6 a.m. Shift change at a naval installation happened at 0600. The communications division would have new personnel cycling and old personnel logging off. For approximately 15 minutes around shift change, there was a gap. Not a hole, not a breach, but a period of elevated activity and reduced oversight. David knew this, not from any classified briefing, but from having lived it. From having been one of the people moving through those 15 minutes 100 times. Your inside contact moves during shift change, David said. Mac sat forward. They received the module during the handoff window, not inside the installation. That's too exposed. There's no way to move hardware that size through security without it being logged. So the handoff happens outside the perimeter, in the civilian zone. Then the contact carries what they need, not the hardware itself, but the key data extracted from it. Photographed, digitally copied, whatever the extraction method is. The hardware can be disposed of. What matters is the key. He looked at Mac. Does your inside contact have access to a civilian entrance? A gate they use regularly, not the main security checkpoint. Mac opened a file, scrolled. There's a contractor entrance on the east side of the perimeter, regularly used by civilian personnel associated with the communications division. That's where it happens, David said. That's the exchange point. Rice was already typing. If we position surveillance on the contractor entrance. You can't, David said. She stopped. Bed. If there's a leak inside your chain of command, any surveillance order you issue tonight is a signal. Whoever is talking hears that you've narrowed to the contractor entrance and the location changes. You get one shot at this and you can't telegraph it. He looked at Mac. How many people in this room right now have clearance on this operation? Mac said. You, me, Reese, and the driver. Your driver's been with you tonight since before the diner. Since 7 p.m., he's mine. I trust him. Okay. Then it stays in this room. No additional surveillance orders. No notifications up the chain. David paused. You need someone physically at that contractor entrance before 6 a.m. who can identify and intercept the exchange without triggering any internal communication that can be monitored. Mac looked at him. David looked back. I know, David said. Don't say it. I wasn't going to say anything, Mac said. You were thinking it very loudly. Rice almost smiled. I said I'd be done by morning, David said. The installation is 2 hours northeast, roughly. So I leave here at 3:30. I'm on site by 5:30. I'm at the contractor entrance by 05:45. 15-minute window. He looked at the map. I need the contact's photo, vehicle registration if you have it, and I need an authorization, something that lets me hold them on site long enough for you to arrive with proper backup. I can give you a federal consultant credential that won't hold for more than 10 minutes if they lawyer up immediately, David said. What else? A long pause. Rice said quietly, We have a warrant. A sealed warrant obtained 2 days ago on the basis of the informant's intelligence. It covers any individual identified as participating in the transfer of Module 7 Echo. She looked at Mac. He qualifies as an authorized executor under the terms of the warrant if you designate him as operational support. Mac was quiet for a moment. The weight of what he was about to do was visible on his face, not doubt exactly, but the specific gravity of a decision that has consequences in multiple directions and no clean path through. Done, he said. David nodded. Then I need 4 hours. 2 to drive, 1 to stage, 1 to sleep. Sleep, Rice said, not sarcastic, more like surprised. 45 minutes, David said. On a floor is fine. I've slept in worse places than a converted barn in Pennsylvania. He pushed back from the table. Wake me at 3:15. He went back to the room where Emma was sleeping, lay down on the floor beside the cot with his jacket folded under his head and his phone face up on the floor beside him. He could hear Emma's breathing in the dark, slow and even and completely trusting. He was asleep in 4 minutes. Mac appeared in the doorway, looked at the two of them, the man on the floor, the child on the cot, and stood there for a moment in a way that people stand when they are seeing something they didn't expect to feel anything about and are feeling something anyway. He went back down the hall. At 3:15 on the dot, Rice knocked on the door frame. David was awake before her knuckle made contact with the wood he'd surfaced from sleep in the last 60 seconds. The internal clock that had never stopped working, regardless of what his civilian life asked of it. He sat up, put on his jacket, looked at Emma. She was still asleep. Her hand had fallen off the edge of the cot during the night, hanging down toward where he'd been lying. He took her hand gently and placed it back beside her on the blanket. He stood up, moved to the door, stopped, turned back, looked at her one more time in the dark hair, the stubborn jaw, the mouth slightly open, the complete and total vulnerability of a sleeping child who trusted the world because she trusted him. He thought about the men on those ships, their daughters, their sons, their people at home who trusted them the same way Emma trusted him completely, without reservation, because there was nothing in the record to suggest the trust had ever been wrong. He turned back to the door. "Let's go," he said. Rice handed him a folder as they walked down the corridor. Inside, one photograph, one vehicle registration, one page of biographical information on the individual identified as the inside contact at the naval installation. David opened the folder under the corridor light. He looked at the photograph. He stopped walking. Rice noticed he'd stopped and turned back. She saw his face. "You know him," she said. It wasn't a question. David looked at this photograph for 3 more seconds, at the face that had not changed as much as the years between should have required, at the name printed below it. He closed the folder. "Yeah," he said. His voice was perfectly controlled, perfectly flat. The voice of a man who had been trained to keep his face and his voice separate from whatever was happening below them. "I know him." Rice waited. "We served together," David said. "2 deployments. He was one of the best operators I ever worked alongside." He looked at the closed folder. "He saved my life once, in a place I'm not going to name." The corridor was very quiet. "Does that change?" Rice started. "No," David said. "Yay." He said it immediately, and he said it absolutely, and there was nothing in his voice that invited further discussion. Not because he didn't feel it. He felt it with a completeness that was almost physical. The specific grief of a particular kind of betrayal, the kind that only lands that hard when it comes from someone you believed in, someone you would have trusted with everything, someone who had once trusted you back. "No," David said again, quieter. "It doesn't change anything." He tucked the folder under his arm and walked to the vehicle. The driver had the engine running. The rain had stopped. The Pennsylvania sky outside the Claymont facility was still dark, but at the far eastern edge of it, just visible above the tree line, there was the first faint suggestion of something lighter. Not dawn yet, not even close. But coming. David got in the vehicle and didn't look back at the building where his daughter was sleeping. Because if he looked back, he might not leave. And there were men on ships who needed him to leave. The drive northeast took 2 hours and 11 minutes. David spent the first 40 minutes reviewing everything in the folder, not reading he'd already read it but processing. Running it through the part of his mind that had been trained to find the gap between what a person presented and what they actually were. The gap between the man in the photograph and the man he remembered. His name was Ryan Calloway, 38 years old, originally from Spokane, Washington, had enlisted at 19, tested into the SEAL pipeline at 22. Completed BUDS in the same class as David, Class 287. They'd gone through Hell Week together, through the kind of suffering that strips everything decorative off a person and leaves only what's actually there underneath. David had seen Ryan Calloway at his most reduced, most broken, most elemental. Had seen him choose to keep going when every physical argument his body could make said stop. He'd been someone you could trust with your life in the dark. The folder said he had left the Navy 4 years ago. Medical separation, a spinal injury sustained during a training evolution that had ended his operational career with the clinical finality of a door closing on everything he'd worked for. The injury itself wasn't classified. The aftermath was in the file 2 surgeries, a long rehabilitation, a transition to a civilian contractor role through a defense firm with naval installation access. Pay grade commensurate with his experience. Clean record, no flags. Get that? Until 11 months ago, when his name had surfaced in a financial forensics thread, a series of deposits irregular, but not dramatic, into an account that didn't belong to him. An account traced eventually through 3 layers of shell companies, to an entity connected to the network Mac had been building a case against for almost a year. David put the folder on the seat beside him and looked at the road. He understood in a way he suspected Mac and Rice could not fully understand what happened to men like Ryan after the door closed. He'd seen it. He'd felt the edges of it himself in the worst months after his own separation. The particular vertigo of a life built entirely around purpose suddenly having no ground under it. The identity gone overnight. The body that had been a precision instrument becoming just a body. The rank, the team, the mission, the brotherhood, all of it gone. And in its place, nothing the civilian world had ever thought to prepare you for. David had survived it because of Emma. Because a 6-year-old girl needed him to figure it out, and that was a mission parameter clear enough to navigate by. Ryan Calloway had not had Emma. That wasn't an excuse. David was clear with himself about that. It wasn't an excuse, and it wasn't a justification. And when he arrived at that contractor entrance at 0545 and saw Ryan Calloway's face across the space between them, none of this internal understanding was going to change what had to happen. But he understood it. And understanding it was the worst part. Yeah. At 5:22 a.m., the driver pulled off the main road onto a service track 2 miles from the naval installation's eastern perimeter. The sky had gone from black to a deep blue-gray, the specific color of the 20 minutes before dawn, when the darkness hasn't left, but the light has already committed to arriving. David could hear faintly the sound of water. The installation sat on a coastal inlet. He knew this from memory from 6 departures and 6 returns, from the particular quality of the air at 0600 on a morning in this part of the country. He got out of the vehicle. Reese had ridden with him, sitting in the front mostly silent for the last hour. She got out now and came around to where he was standing. "Mac is 12 minutes out," she said. "His vehicle and 3 additional federal units. They'll stage on the main approach road and wait for your signal. Signal is a call to this number." She handed him a card. 2 rings, then hang up. That means you've made contact and you need them moving. They'll be at the contractor entrance in under 4 minutes from that call. David took the card, looked at it, put it in his jacket pocket. "If the handoff has already happened when you arrive." Rice started. "It won't have," David said. "Shift change is 0600. It's 5:23 now. If Calloway is the contact, he's staged somewhere near the contractor entrance, but he hasn't moved yet. The exchange requires the person delivering the module to be there first. Calloway doesn't expose himself until he can confirm the delivery." He paused. "I've got a window." "And if the person delivering the module arrives at the same time you do," David looked at her. "Then I have 2 problems instead of 1. She held his gaze. "You're not armed." "I noticed." "I don't want a weapon," David said. "If I go in there with a weapon and I'm wrong about any part of this, I've just committed a federal offense. And if I'm right, I want him talking, not scared. Armed men don't make people talk. They make people calculate." He looked toward the direction of the installation perimeter invisible in the pre-dawn gray. "I know how Ryan thinks. I want to be a conversation, not a confrontation." Rice looked like she wanted to argue with that. She didn't. "4 minutes from your call," she said again. "Understood." He turned toward the perimeter track. "Walker." Her voice stopped him. He looked back. "Be careful," she said, not procedurally, the way a person says it when they mean it. "I'm always careful," David said. "That's why I'm still here." He walked. The contractor entrance to the installation was a secondary gate on the eastern perimeter, a chain-link passage with a card reader and a guard booth that was staffed during business hours and monitored remotely during off hours. On foot approaching from the civilian access road, it looked like what it was supposed to look like, an unremarkable point of passage. The kind of place that a person could move through every day for 4 years without anyone giving them a second thought. At 5:31 a.m. David reached the civilian access road and slowed. He saw Ryan Calloway's vehicle immediately. A gray sedan registered to his current address outside the installation, parked in the small civilian lot adjacent to the contractor entrance. The engine was off. 1 person inside. David stopped walking. "Bish." He stood on the access road 30 meters from the vehicle and did something he almost never allowed himself to do in operational situations. He breathed. 1 full breath, completely deliberate, in through the nose and out through the mouth, the way the instructors had taught it 20 years ago when he was 19 years old and terrified and choosing not to show it. Then he walked to the sedan and knocked on the driver's window. "Mabe." The reaction was instantaneous and revealing. The figure inside moved fast, a sharp, practiced flinch, the body responding before the mind. The specific startled response of someone who had been trained to threat assess and had been sitting alone in a dark car for long enough that their guard had dropped exactly the wrong amount. Ryan Calloway turned and looked through the glass. "Dave." And David watched the sequence of recognitions cross his face. The initial threat assessment, unknown figure, threat level being calculated. Then the processing facial recognition, the slow resolution of a face from the past. Then the thing that David had not been certain would happen. Something broke in Ryan Calloway's eyes. Joe, not fear, not anger. Something that was almost relief and almost shame, and was entirely neither of those things. The expression of a man who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has just had it suddenly violently become visible to someone who actually knew him before he started carrying it. Ryan didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't reach for his phone. He sat completely still for 3 seconds. Then he unlocked the car door. David opened it and sat down in the passenger seat. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Ryan was heavier than the photograph, though not much the kind of weight that comes from a body that used to run hard and swim hard and move hard every single day, and then one day stopped, because a spinal injury made everything that used to be natural into something that needed to be negotiated. His face had lines in it that David didn't recognize from before. But the jaw was the same. The set of the eyes was the same. The quality of stillness, the trained, considered stillness of an operator was the same. "Dave," Ryan said. His voice was quieter than David remembered. "Ryan." Silence. "How long have they been watching?" Ryan said. 11 months. Ryan closed his eyes, opened them. "The diner. Last night." "That was me," David said. "I was passing through. I didn't know what I was walking into." Something moved across Ryan's face. "Of all the diners in Pennsylvania." "Yeah," but another silence. The sky outside was continuing its slow commitment to morning. Inside the car, the air was the particular thickness of a conversation that is carrying more weight than conversations are supposed to carry. "The module," David said. "Where is it?" Ryan's jaw tightened. "Ryan, where is it?" "The person bringing it, they're not here yet." "How long?" "They were supposed to be here at 5:45, 15 minutes. David looked at the time on his phone. 5:34. He said nothing. "How did you get here?" Ryan asked. "FBI brought me in after the diner. They needed someone outside the chain of command." David paused. "Someone who couldn't be the leak." Ryan went very still. The leak. Someone inside Mac's investigation has been talking. Someone who knows the operational details well enough to keep the network one step ahead for 11 months. David watched his face. "Was that you?" "Yeah." Ryan turned and looked at him directly. "No," he said. "That was not me." A pause. "I don't know who it is. I never had access to anything about the investigation. I was the end point, the inside access. That's all I was." David believed him. He didn't know if that believing was based on evidence or on the specific neural pathways carved by 2 deployments and 1 night in a place he'd never name, but he believed him. "What did they have on you?" David asked. Quietly, not prosecutorially, the way you ask someone you know. Ryan laughed. Not a real laugh, the kind that comes from a place below humor. "What did they have?" He shook his head. "My daughter's medical bills." He said it simply flatly, the way people say things that are too large for decoration. "Her name is Sophie. She's 9. She has a cardiac condition, she's had 2 surgeries already, and she needs a 3rd. My insurance after the medical separation, the coverage..." He stopped. "You know what it costs. You know what the gap is between what insurance covers and what they actually need." David was quiet. "They came to me 8 months ago. Someone who knew what I owed, who knew I had the access, who knew I was..." Ryan stopped. "Who knew I was desperate." "Ryan." "I know," Ryan said. His voice cracked on the 2 words, and then steadied. "I know what I did. I know exactly what I did. I've known every day since I agreed to it. You want to know what that feels like? Knowing what you did. Knowing what you are now compared to what you were." He looked at David. "I think about you sometimes, the guys from the team. I think about what you'd say if you..." He stopped again. "And then, here you are." The silence in the car was enormous. "Sophie needs that surgery," David said. "Yes." "How much?" Ryan said a number. It was a large number. It was the kind of number that is completely abstract until it becomes completely real, and when it becomes real, it becomes the only thing in the frame. David sat with that for a moment. "The people who came to you," David said. "You have names, contact methods, communication records. Yes, if you cooperate full cooperation, everything you have the federal attorney can negotiate. The surgery." David paused. "I can't promise you anything. I want you to understand that. I can't promise you what a deal looks like. But I know that what you have, the access chain, the contact records, that's significant. That's the kind of significant that federal attorneys pay attention to." Ryan looked at him. "You'd go to bat for that. I'll tell them exactly what you gave me. What you're willing to give. Yes. Even after this." "Ryan." David's voice was very level. "You're not a bad man who did a bad thing. You're a good man who did a bad thing because he ran out of road. I know the difference. I've seen both." He paused. "But the hardware cannot reach this installation. What's coming in 15 minutes cannot happen. I need you to understand that." Ryan looked through the windshield at the lightening sky. His hands were in his lap, very still. "The men on those ships," Ryan said. "Yes. I thought." He stopped. "I told myself the module would just that they'd use it to access, not to." He pressed his eyes closed. "I told myself it wouldn't hurt anyone." "Ryan." "I know," Ryan said. "I know that was a lie I told myself because I needed a lie I could live inside." He opened his eyes. "I know." At 5:41 a.m. headlights appeared at the far end of the access road. Both men saw them at the same time. David felt the entire situation shift. The weight of the conversation suddenly redistributed by the arrival of the variable that couldn't be reasoned with, couldn't be reached, couldn't be offered anything, because it wasn't here to negotiate. It was here to complete a transaction. "That's them," Ryan said. His voice had changed, gone flat and certain. "How many?" "Usually one, sometimes two." "Armed?" "Always." David's hand went to his jacket pocket. The card with Rice's number. 2 rings and hang up. 4 minutes. He looked at Ryan. "I need a choice from you right now. Fast. The way we used to make choices." Ryan looked at him. "You call me in for the delivery like normal," David said. "You say I'm a contact. Someone you needed to have present. You make a reason. You keep them calm. I need 60 seconds to get to the call and get back up moving." He paused. "Or, you tell me right now, this doesn't work, and I go to plan B." "What's plan B?" Ryan said. "I don't have one," David said, "so it needs to be plan A." Ryan looked at the approaching headlights. The vehicle was moving slowly, the specific caution of someone who knew this road and was arriving on schedule and had no reason yet to suspect that anything was different. "Okay," Ryan said. "Okay." "Plan A," Ryan said. "Get out of the car. Come around to my side. You're my associate. You're here for the handoff. You've got the technical equipment we need for the transfer. Just be somebody. Just be present." "I can do that," David said. He was out of the car in 2 seconds, around to Ryan's side, standing beside the open driver's door when Ryan stepped out. David positioned himself slightly behind, and to Ryan's right, not threatening, not subservient, just present. The way a legitimate associate would stand. The vehicle stopped 15 feet away. The engine ran for 3 seconds, then cut. One person got out. Male, late 40s. The kind of build that had been powerful once and retained the memory of it. He was carrying a hard-sided case about the size of a laptop bag held against his body with the specific body language of someone transporting something irreplaceable. He looked at Ryan, looked at David. His hand moved toward his jacket. "He's with me," Ryan said immediately. His voice was steady, operational, the voice of a man who had spent years performing under pressure. Technical support. We need someone who can verify the device specifications before transfer. You want to hand over hardware that can't be confirmed, or you want to do this right. The man's hand stopped. He looked at David again. David met his eyes with the particular blankness of a technician, not the controlled stillness of an operator, which was different, which a trained person might read, but the mild, slightly bored inattention of someone present for the technical part, not the dangerous part. Nobody said anything about an extra person, the man said. Nobody said anything about a lot of things, Ryan said. Do you want to stand here and discuss the communication failures, or do you want to complete the transfer? A pause. Long enough that David felt the situation balance on an edge, the specific edge between a person deciding to trust what they're seeing and a person deciding not to. The man stepped forward. David put his hand in his jacket pocket, felt the card. He needed 30 more seconds, just 30 seconds close enough to make the approach far enough that the backup vehicles wouldn't be visible when they pulled in. The case, Ryan said to the man. Let my associate look at the seal before we open it. Standard verification. The man held out the case. David took it with both hands, looked at it, turned it over slowly in the deliberate way of someone performing an inspection they've performed before. He looked at the seal on the locking mechanism. He looked at the edge seams. He looked up at the man. This seal's been broken, he said. The man's face changed. Right here, David said, pointing to a seam that was perfectly intact. That's a problem. That seal is fine, the man said, stepping forward. Give me. David stepped back, created a half-second of space, pulled the card from his pocket, and called the number. 2 rings. Hung up. The man registered the movement of the phone. Registered what it meant half a second after it happened. The half-second that had been the margin in the diner and was the margin now, and had always been in David's experience, the margin that decided everything. The man went for his jacket. Ryan Calloway moved first. He stepped into this man's reach and controlled the gun arm the way David had controlled Gray Hoodie's arm in the diner 12 hours ago. The same fundamental geometry, the same application of the other person's momentum against them. Not perfectly, Ryan hadn't moved like this in 4 years, and the spinal injury had taken something from the fluidity of it, but well enough. The gun didn't clear the jacket. David was there in the next second. The case went to the ground carefully. The instinct to protect the hardware, even now, even here, was automatic and slightly absurd, and David's forearm went across the man's upper body, and his weight came in behind it, and the 3 of them went against the side of Ryan's sedan in a controlled collapse. 17 seconds later, the man was on the ground, and David was kneeling on his back, with the man's own belt wrapped around his wrists, a solution that was impractical in about 7 different ways, and the only one available. Ryan was standing 3 feet away. His right hand was pressed to his lower back, the spinal injury aggravated by the movement. His face was white, but he was standing. He looked at David on the ground. "You still move fast," he said. "Not as fast as I used to," David said. "Nobody is," Ryan said. The first federal vehicle came around the access road bend with its lights on at 5:47 a.m., then the second, then 2 more. David looked up at the sky. Full dawn now. Not the suggestion of it, the thing itself. Gray going to gold, going to blue, the specific clarity of an early morning that has earned its light after a long dark. He stayed where he was until Mac's door opened, and Mac crossed the access road with 3 agents and someone who appeared to be a federal prosecutor moving with the purpose of a team that had been waiting all night for exactly this and was relieved and trying not to show how relieved they were. Mac looked at the man on the ground, looked at the case, looked at Ryan Calloway standing beside the sedan with his hand on his lower back. Then he looked at David. 4 minutes, David said. "I told you 4 minutes. 3 minutes 40, Mac said. David stood up, brushed off his knees, looked at Ryan. Ryan was already being approached by two of the agents. He wasn't resisting. He stood straight as the injury allowed, and he held his hands out in front of him, and he looked at David across the space between them with an expression that David would think about for a long time afterward. Not asking for anything, not offering anything, just looking. The way people look at someone who knew them before and is still there after. His daughter, David said to Mac quietly. Sophie Calloway, 9 years old, cardiac surgery. When the prosecutor's office sits down with him, that's the context. Don't let them miss it. Mac looked at him. You went in there without a weapon and talked a federal witness into voluntary cooperation. He wasn't hard to talk to, David said. He'd been trying to talk to someone for 8 months. Logged. An agent placed handcuffs on Ryan Calloway and walked him toward a federal vehicle. Ryan didn't look back. David watched him go. He put his hands in his jacket pockets. The case with Module 7 Echo was being logged and photographed and secured by a pair of agents with latex gloves, and the focused attention of people handling something they were very glad was no longer in transit. The men on those ships would not know what hadn't happened to them today. They would wake up and run through their systems checks and communicate on their encrypted channels, and have no idea that a compromised key had been intercepted on an access road outside their installation before dawn by a man in a faded gray jacket who had driven through the night from a diner in Stone Creek and had not slept more than 45 minutes and had left his 6-year-old daughter in a converted barn 2 hours west. Basoy. They wouldn't know. That was fine. That was exactly how it was supposed to work. David took out his phone and called Rice. She picked up on the first ring. It's done, he said. Modules secure. Calloway is in custody. Secondary subject is detained. Nobody's hurt. A pause on her end. He could hear her exhale. You need to get back, she said. I know, David said. Emma's awake. She asked where you were 20 minutes ago. Daniels told her you were helping someone. What did she say? She said, quote, he always does that. A pause. She asked if she could have cereal. David stood on the access road in the full light of morning, with federal agents moving around him and the sound of the coastal inlet somewhere in the near distance, and he almost laughed. The laugh didn't quite make it out, but it was there right at the surface, the kind that comes from something real. Tell her yes, he said. Tell her I'll be there before she's done eating. He ended the call, looked at the sky one more time, and walked to the vehicle. Metue. He had 2 hours of road in front of him. His daughter was waiting. The rest of it, the debrief, the statements, the federal paperwork, the story that was going to be told in rooms he'd never see, about a night that had started in a diner in Pennsylvania and ended on a coastal access road at dawn. All of that could happen without him for a little while longer. Emma was waiting. That was the only mission parameter that mattered now. That. He drove the 2 hours back to Claymont without the radio on. The silence was deliberate. He needed it the way he sometimes needed cold water, not for comfort, but for clarity. The road unrolled in front of him in the early morning light, and David Walker sat with everything the night had left him and let it settle without trying to arrange it into anything cleaner than it actually was. Ryan Calloway was in federal custody. Module 7 Echo was in an evidence locker. The men on 6 active naval vessels in the Atlantic were running their morning systems checks right now and would never know how close the ground had shifted beneath them. All of that was true and real and finished. And David still felt the weight of Ryan's face when the handcuffs went on. Still felt the specific quality of that last look across the access road. Not asking for forgiveness, not offering excuses, just looking. The look of a man who had made choices that couldn't be unmade and had known, somewhere underneath everything, that this was always where those choices ended. David understood that. He understood it in a way that had nothing to do with sympathy for what Ryan had done and everything to do with knowing who Ryan had been before he did it. That understanding was going to sit with him for a while. He accepted that. He pulled into the Claymont facility at 7:51 a.m. Before the vehicle had fully stopped, the side door of the main building opened, and Emma appeared in the doorway in her jacket and her backpack, the bowl of cereal apparently long finished, her dark hair loose and slightly wild from sleeping on a government-issue cot. She saw the vehicle. Saw David through the windshield. She walked to the vehicle in about 4 steps and then stopped performing calm and ran the last 6 feet. He was out of the door and down on one knee in the gravel, and she hit him with the full momentum of a 6-year-old who had been holding herself together since 11 o'clock the previous night and was now finally in the one place that meant she didn't have to anymore. He wrapped both arms around her, and she pressed her face against his shoulder, and he felt her breathe one big shuddering breath, the kind that a child takes when the thing they were worried about turns out to be okay. He held on. He didn't count the seconds this time. "I ate cereal," she said into his shoulder. "I heard," he said. "I'm glad." It wasn't the good kind. It was the boring kind without any color. "I'll get you the color kind when we get home." She leaned back and looked at his face with the precise, thorough attention she always brought to this inspection, the one that checked not just whether he was present, but whether all of him was present, whether the version of her father that had left was the same version that had returned. She must have found what she was looking for. She nodded once, satisfied, and said, "Okay, can we go?" "In a little while," he said. "I have to talk to some people first." She accepted this. She took his hand, and they walked into the building together, and that was the most natural thing that had happened since the bell above the Crossroads Diner door chimed at 10:47 the previous night. Mac arrived at the facility 40 minutes later. He came in looking like a man who had not slept in 22 hours, and had made peace with that fact without particularly enjoying it. He had a cup of coffee in each hand, and he set one in front of David without being asked, and sat down across the table in the central room. Emma was in the side room with Officer Daniels, who had driven from the diner to the facility sometime in the early morning, and was by all available evidence a genuinely patient and kind human being who had spent the last several hours letting a 6-year-old explain the rules of various games she'd invented. "Calloway gave us 4 hours of debrief," Max said. "Starting at 6:15, the prosecutor's office sent someone to sit in." He wrapped both hands around his cup. He gave everything. Contact names, communication methods, the full chain from Maryland to last night. 6 months of transactions documented. He kept records. A pause. He kept records the whole time. David looked at him. Because he knew this was where it ended. That's what the prosecutor thinks. Mac looked at the table. He was building his own case. Insurance, maybe. Or he was building a way out, David said. And he just needed someone to open the door. Mac was quiet for a moment. "The prosecutor's office is looking at the cooperation very seriously. The information he's provided, it's significant. It's going to dismantle the network in a way 11 months of conventional investigation hadn't managed." He paused. "Sophie Calloway's surgery. I made sure the prosecutor understood the full picture." "Thank you. I told them what you told me, that's all." Mac looked up. "He asked about you, Calloway, during the debrief. He wanted to know if you were the one who'd called in the federal backup." "What did the prosecutor say?" She told him a federal consultant had made the identification and the contact. A pause. He said, quote, "Tell him I'm glad it was him." Then he didn't say anything else about it. David looked at his coffee cup. He thought about Class 287, about Hell Week and the cold Pacific water and the specific kind of trust that forms between men who have chosen the same suffering. About the fact that the trust hadn't been wrong, that Ryan Calloway, faced with the end of the road, had stood up when it counted, had moved when David needed him to move, had handed over everything he had with the exhausted, deliberate honesty of someone finally setting down something too heavy to carry any further. He'd saved David's life once, in a place David would never name. David had done something for him last night. It wasn't equivalent. The math didn't work out clean, but it was something. The leak in your investigation, David said. Did Calloway's information help identify it? Mac set his cup down. The specific weight of the gesture said yes, and it's not simple. One of our analysts, Mac said. 18 months with the field office. Clean background check, all the right credentials, all the right... He stopped. She'd been passing case updates to an intermediary for approximately 9 months. Calloway's records gave us the financial thread. The arrest happened at 5:40 a.m., roughly the same time you were on that access road. David let that settle. So the leak was patched before she could notify anyone that the handoff had been intercepted. Correct. Which means the network lost its eyes inside our operation at the same moment it lost the hardware. Mac looked at him steadily. You walking into that diner last night, the timing of that, the disruption of the original handoff, the compression of the timeline that forced the network to move before they could adapt, that created a cascade that we could not have engineered if we'd tried. He paused. A federal operations planner with a year of preparation couldn't have constructed a better sequential outcome. David looked at him. I stopped in because Emma was hungry. I know, Mac said. She wanted eggs. I know that too. They sat with that for a moment. The pure, almost absurd contingency of it, the way an ordinary Tuesday night, a tired 6-year-old, a half-eaten plate of eggs, had pulled a thread that unraveled 11 months of criminal infrastructure. There was no lesson in that. There was no principle or framework that could account for it. It was just life behaving the way life behaves when it decides to be larger than the stories people build to contain it. At 9:15 a.m. Gerald Mack slid a single sheet of paper across the table. David looked at it without touching it. What is this? He said. An offer, Mac said. Not from me. From people above me. People who watched the security footage from the diner, reviewed the access road intercept, read the overnight debrief, and made some decisions. David looked at the paper. It was clean formal, the specific typography of government documents that were meant to be taken seriously. He read it. He read it again. It was a reinstatement offer. Not to the Navy, he was past the active duty window, and everyone understood that. A federal position attached to a joint task force focused on the intersection of military technology theft and organized criminal networks. The kind of work that used everything he actually was. The salary was real. The benefits included full medical for dependents. The operational base would be within 40 miles of Stone Creek. He read the dependent medical coverage line one more time. He put the paper down. Who authorized this? He said. People who don't usually authorize things quickly, Mac said. They moved fast. That tells you something. It tells me they want something. They want someone who can do what you did last night, in a formal capacity with support with a team behind him. Mac leaned forward slightly. David. The network Calloway gave us, that's one branch. The architect is still out there. The hardware theft in Maryland was one operation among several. There are active threats to military personnel and systems that require exactly the skill set you've been spending 3 years pretending you don't have. David was quiet. You could go back, Mac said. Not to what you were, to something new, something that still matters. The room was very still. David thought about the question the way he thought about serious things, not pushing toward an answer, but letting the answer find its own weight. He thought about the gray hoodie, and the $38, and the long drives, and the school events, and the homework at the kitchen table, and the ordinary, essential, irreplaceable smallness of the life he'd chosen. He thought about Ryan Calloway, about the medical bills, and the desperation, and the road that had no more options on it. He thought about Sophie Calloway, 9 years old, needing a surgery her father had tried to pay for in the worst way a man could pay for something. He thought about the men on those ships. He thought about what it meant to have a skill that other people didn't have, in a world that needed that skill, and the question of what you owed not to institutions, not to governments, but to the specific human beings who were safer or less safe depending on whether you showed up. He thought about Emma. He looked at the paper one more time. Then he stood up and walked to the doorway of the side room. Emma was sitting on the cot. She had Daniels involved in some kind of elaborate hand game that Daniels was clearly losing. She looked up when David appeared in the doorway. "Are you done talking?" she said. "Almost," he said. "Hey, can I ask you something?" She looked at him seriously. "Okay. If Daddy had a job closer to home, closer to school, closer to Grandma's doing something important, would that be okay with you?" She thought about this with the full weight of her 6-year-old deliberation. She was not a child who gave answers she didn't mean. David had raised her not to. "Would you still pick me up from school?" she said. "Every day." "Would you still make the thing with the cheese on top?" "The baked ziti, yes." "Would you still come to my recital?" "I have never missed your recital," David said. "That's a perfect record. I protect perfect records." She thought for one more moment. "And the job is important." "Yes, Bug, it's important." She nodded with the gravity of someone who has weighed the relevant factors and reached a considered conclusion. "Then okay," she said, and turned back to the hand game with Daniels, who had been listening to all of this with an expression she was working very hard to keep professional. David stood in the doorway for another moment. Then he went back to the table. He sat down, picking up the pen that Mac had placed on the table at some point with the quiet patience of a man who understood that this decision couldn't be rushed and had not tried to rush it. He signed the paper, slid it back. Mac looked at the signature, looked at David, and something in his face beneath all the professional apparatus of a 20-year federal agent was simply and genuinely relieved. "Welcome back," Mac said. "I'm not back," David said. "I'm doing something different." Fair distinction? My daughter's school calendar takes priority over everything except an active threat to human life. That's non-negotiable, and it goes in writing. It'll go in writing. And I work with people I can trust. After last night, your chain of command has a credibility problem. I choose my team, or I don't have one. Mac looked at him. "Rice," he said. "Yes," David said. "Rice." "Anyone else?" "Not yet. I'll know when I know." Mac nodded. "Reasonable." He picked up the signed paper and folded it once with the care of someone handling something that represented a significant expenditure of effort by a significant number of people. The architect is the long-term objective. The network Callaway gave us is the entry point. It's going to take time. "It usually does," David said. "And you're all right with that, the long game?" Sure, David looked at him. "I spent 3 years raising a 6-year-old alone. I know something about the long game." For the first time since David had met him in the Crossroads Diner approximately 8 hours ago, Gerald Mack smiled. It was a small smile, not performative, the kind that comes from somewhere genuine. "Fair enough," he said. They shook hands across the table. Then Mac stood, gathered his things, and moved toward the door. He stopped at the threshold. "One thing I've been thinking about since the diner," he said. "When you first assessed those 3 men coming in, you made them in under 4 seconds, positioning, intent, everything." He paused. "How long had you been sitting there before they arrived?" "About 25 minutes, David said. "You were scanning the room the whole time." "I'm always scanning the room," David said. "That doesn't turn off." Mac looked at him for a moment. "No," he said quietly. "I suppose it doesn't." He gave a short nod. "We'll be in touch." He left. David sat alone at the table for approximately 90 seconds, which was about how long it took him to feel the full weight of the night all at once: the diner, the van, the drive, the access road. Ryan's face, Emma in his arms in the gravel, and then to set it down. Not to forget it. You didn't forget things like this. But to put it in its right place in the order of things behind what mattered most, which was sitting in a side room, losing a hand game, and waiting to go home. He stood up, He went to get his daughter. The drive back to Stone Creek took 1 hour and 47 minutes. Emma slept for most of it, her head against the window, her backpack in her lap, the complete and absolute sleep of a child who had been calm for a long time and was now finished being calm. David drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting on the door and the radio still off, and the Pennsylvania countryside moving past in the full light of a Tuesday morning that looked completely ordinary from the outside. They stopped once for gas. David stood at the pump and looked at the sky clear. Now the clouds from last night, gone the blue, completely unambiguous, and thought about Terrence Boyle on the floor of the diner, about Kyle Drummond and his broken wrist, about Marcus Trent, who had served, who had come out a door and then walked in a direction David recognized as possible and had spent years being grateful he hadn't chosen. He thought about Ryan Calloway signing papers in a federal facility somewhere, telling everything he knew, trading the rest of his freedom for the chance to give his daughter a surgery and whatever came after it. He thought about Sophie Calloway, who didn't know any of this yet, who was 9 years old and had a heart that needed fixing, and a father who had done a terrible thing for the only reason that had ever felt large enough to justify it, which was her. The pump clicked off. David replaced the nozzle, got back in the truck. Emma woke up as they crossed into Stone Creek. She surfaced gradually, a shift, a blink, the slow reorientation of a child reassembling the world from its pieces. "Are we home?" she said. "Almost," David said. 5 minutes. She looked out the window at the familiar road, the familiar trees, the familiar sequence of landmarks that meant home. The gas station with the bell, the corner with the library, the turn onto Ridgeline Road where the houses started to be the ones they knew. "Daddy," she said. "Yeah." "Last night at the diner." She was looking out the window still. "Were you scared?" He thought about that. About the specific interior experience of the moment before he'd moved the clarity, the geometry, the countdown. Whether fear had been any part of that. "A little," he said. "Not for me." She seemed to understand exactly what he meant. She didn't ask the follow-up question. They pulled into their driveway at 11:43 a.m. The house looked exactly like they'd left it 2 days ago, a small colonial on a quiet street. The flower boxes under the front windows that David watered on Sundays, the basketball hoop in the driveway that Emma had so far shown very little interest in, but David maintained out of optimism. Emma was out of the truck before he'd cut the engine. She ran to the front door with her backpack bouncing, checked that the spare key was under the second porch step, and let herself in with the ease of a child who had done this 100 times. The door swung open, and she disappeared inside. David sat in the truck for a moment. He looked at the house, at the flower boxes, at the basketball hoop. He thought about what Mac had said. "You're not back, you're doing something different." He'd said it first, but it was true either way. The man who had lived in this house for 3 years, the man who had worn the gray hoodie and the $38 and the practiced invisibility, he was still here. Still the one who'd be at school pickup and at the kitchen table and at the recital with the perfect attendance record. Warrior. But underneath that man, for the first time in 3 years, something else had been given permission to exist again. Something that had been set aside without being extinguished. A capability, a purpose, a direction that pointed outward from the ordinary life into the larger world and said there are people who need this, and you have it, and the two facts together constitute a responsibility. He had stopped running from it. He had integrated it. He was not a warrior who had become a father. He was not a father who had once been a warrior. He was both the way certain things are permanently, both the way water is wet and deep at the same time, and neither property cancels the other. He got out of the truck. He walked to the front door. Inside, Emma had already dropped her backpack at the bottom of the stairs and was standing in the kitchen with the refrigerator open, conducting a serious inventory of its contents, with the focused intention of someone who had eaten only half a club sandwich, a bowl of colorless cereal, and whatever Officer Daniels had found for her over the course of an extremely unusual night. "We need groceries," she said without turning around. I'll go this afternoon, David said. We need the color cereal. On the list. And the cheese, for the thing. Baked ziti. Yes, I'll get everything. She closed the refrigerator, turned around, and looked at him across the kitchen with an expression that was somehow both 6 years old and ageless, the expression of a person who has decided something and wants to say it plainly. I'm glad you came back, she said. Why, not from the diner, not from the access road. She meant something larger. She was 6 years old, and she meant something large. David crossed the kitchen and put both hands on her shoulders and looked at her directly the way he did when he meant what he was about to say completely. I will always come back, he said. You understand me always. That is a promise I have never broken and will never break. Okay, she looked at him. Assess the statement for accuracy and intent the way she assessed everything with the full seriousness of a person who had learned that the words people said were worth measuring. She nodded. Okay, she said, and wrapped her arms around his waist. Masha. He held her in the kitchen in the ordinary daylight of their ordinary house in their ordinary town, and outside the Tuesday morning continued to be completely unremarkable. And at a naval installation, 2 hours northeast, men ran their systems checks on encrypted communications that were intact and uncompromised, and in a federal facility. A man named Ryan Calloway answered the last of his questions and signed the last of his papers and thought about a 9-year-old girl who was going to get her surgery, and in a Pittsburgh field office, an investigation into a criminal network called The Architect was being reconstituted from the inside out, with information that had been delivered at dawn on an access road by a man who had been asked to be home by morning. The story had started with 3 armed men who looked at a tired father in a faded gray hoodie and saw someone who didn't matter. They were wrong about that. They were wrong because the people society overlooks are not absent. They are present in every room, carrying everything they have ever been, all of it still there beneath the surface of whatever ordinary life they have chosen to build above it. They are the ones who scan the room while everyone else looks at the menu. They are the ones who send the emergency text before the first gun is drawn. They are the ones who stay calm when calm is the only useful thing left to be. And when the moment arrives, when the geometry locks down and the noise falls away and everything reduces to what actually matters, they are already moving. David Walker held his daughter in the kitchen of his house and felt the specific, complete peace of a man who knows exactly what he is for. He was for this, all of it. The baked ziti and the school recitals and the color cereal and the long drives and the listening game and the $38 in his wallet and the quiet, endless, unconditional dailiness of being someone's father. And when the world needed the other part of him, the part that moved through dark rooms with a frightening precision, and made decisions in seconds that other people couldn't make in minutes, that part was still there too. It had never left. It had just been waiting for a reason worthy of it. It always found one.